Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kouri Richins. Eric Richins was born on May 13, 1982, and his life had a profound impact on those around him. Eric was a sports enthusiast who actively participated in basketball, baseball, and soccer. He had a particular passion for outdoor activities, especially hunting. His love for the outdoors was evident in the numerous trophies he collected from around the world. Eric was a fun-loving person who lived in Utah and enjoyed exploring the outdoors with his many motorized vehicles. He was also deeply committed to his faith as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With his family's support, Eric served a 2-year mission in Mexico City, where he became fluent in Spanish. After high school, Eric attended the University of Utah, graduating in 2009 with a degree in international studies and a minor in Spanish. It was during this time that he met Kouri Richins, who worked at Home Depot. Eric, who often visited the store for work, developed a friendly relationship with Kouri and was drawn to her charm and beauty. However, he was too nervous to approach her directly, so he asked a friend to help him get her contact information. While shopping at Home Depot, a friend of Eric's approached Kouri and quietly asked for her phone number, saying that Eric wanted to get to know her better. Eric called Kouri and they arranged to meet in person. Eric and Kouri clicked immediately when they met. Their connection was real, and their first date marked the start of a wonderful romance. As they met each other's families, their relationship grew even stronger. Kouri's family welcomed Eric with open arms, and Eric's family was just as impressed with Kouri's kindness and how well she fit in with them. Eric's 2 older sisters, Katie and Amy, were initially cautious of Kouri, but they soon grew fond of and accepted Kouri. In 2013, Eric and Kouri tied the knot in a private ceremony, marking the beginning of their life together. They welcomed their first child, Carter, shortly after. The family continued to grow with the arrival of Ashton and then Weston, completing their happy family portrait. As a father, Eric found his footing quickly. His sons looked up to him and admired everything he did. Eric, in turn, took immense pride in his children's accomplishments, whether it was their academic achievements, sports victories, or creative pursuits. He was always present to support and celebrate their successes. Eric's entrepreneurial spirit led him to start a stonemasonry business, which flourished due to his exceptional craftsmanship and attention to detail. As a result, his business attracted many clients, providing financial security for Eric and his family. Kouri was a successful real estate entrepreneur who contributed significantly to the family's income. Her expertise in the local market and business acumen made her a valuable partner in their growing family. She would buy homes, renovate them, and sell them at a profit. The Kouri family appeared to have it all, with a lifestyle that seemed perfect on the surface. But beneath this facade, trouble was brewing. On March 4, 2020, the illusion of perfection shattered when Kouri called 911 to report that her husband Eric was unresponsive. When paramedics arrived at the scene, they found that Eric had already passed away. Kouri was devastated by the news and immediately called her mother, Lisa, who rushed to her side. Kouri's brothers, DJ and Ronnie, also joined them, and together they struggled to come to terms with the loss. Earlier that night, Kouri had been celebrating a business success with Eric, marking the purchase of a mansion for her real estate company. Before bed, she had made Eric a Moscow Mule, a drink made with ginger beer and vodka. Kouri had gone to bed around 9 p.m., but instead of sleeping in her own bed, she had lain down with her 9-year-old son in his room because he was having nightmares. Kouri returned to her bedroom around 3 a.m. and found Eric unresponsive. When she touched Eric, she felt that her husband was extremely cold. Realizing that something was wrong, Kouri waited for paramedics to arrive and followed the dispatcher's instructions to perform CPR on Eric. Kouri claimed to have followed the instructions given to her. However, the paramedics were unsure what caused Eric's death, and the lack of information led them to consider the possibility of an aneurysm, given that Eric was a 39-year-old man with no known medical conditions. Further investigation revealed that Eric had complained of chest pains to Kouri the night before he died, which initially strengthened the suspicion of an aneurysm. The autopsy results were unexpected and came as a surprise to all parties involved in the case. It was discovered that Eric died from a fatal dose of fentanyl, a powerful painkiller that can be fatal if overdosed. From the moment Eric died, his family began to suspect that his recreational drug use may have contributed to the fentanyl in his system. Kouri explained that Eric used a nightly THC gummy as a way to unwind after a long day. However, the family had concerns about where Eric was getting these gummies. They suspected that Eric wasn't always buying them from trustworthy sources, and that he might have been purchasing them on the street instead. Eric's mother-in-law, Lisa, was particularly worried because Eric had a history of recreational drug use and may have also bought pain pills from street vendors without knowing they might contain fentanyl, unknowingly putting his life at risk. Eric's family strongly rejected the allegations, convinced that something else was responsible and encouraging investigators to consider other possibilities. Meanwhile, Kouri struggled to rebuild her life. According to her brother Ronnie, she faced numerous challenges, including the void left by her husband's absence. To manage her grief and comfort her children, Kouri found a creative outlet. She self-published a children's book, Are You With Me? On Amazon, aiming to help kids deal with the loss of a loved one. The book tells the story of a boy missing his deceased father through illustrations and storytelling, allowing Kouri to channel her emotions into a positive project. Kouri portrayed Eric as a constant, loving presence in her book, watching over their son. Her mother, Lisa, appreciated the book, saying it helped her family cope with their emotions and find some comfort. However, as detectives looked into Eric's death, they suspected foul play was involved. In a shocking twist, Kouri was arrested and charged with her husband's murder on May 8, 2023, just weeks after she had publicly shared her grief and promoted her book on local Utah news stations. The community was stunned by the news, struggling to understand the sudden turn of events. Kouri, who initially gained public sympathy for her efforts to help children cope with loss, has become embroiled in a devastating scandal. According to court documents, Kouri allegedly killed her husband Eric by administering a lethal dose of a poison. Kouri intentionally spiked Eric's drink, a Moscow Mule, with a fatal amount of fentanyl on the night of his death. However, Kouri's lawyer disputes this, stating that no fentanyl was found on the glassware at their home. Kouri denies any involvement in Eric's death, insisting she had no reason to harm him. Kouri's mother, Lisa, has expressed shock and confusion over the allegations, maintaining that they was happy and had no issues that would have led Kouri to kill Eric. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Kouri and Eric's relationship was not as perfect as it appeared. They had their differences, and Kouri, a stay-at-home mother, craved independence. She was also annoyed by Eric's frequent hunting trips. Lisa claimed that Eric was having an affair, but his family denied this. They sought counseling, but Eric's family said it was because he loved his sons and wanted to make the marriage work. Eric considered divorce and took steps to protect his assets, secretly setting up a trust with his sister Katie. During the investigation, 6 life insurance policies on Eric were found, totaling $3 million. 2 months prior to his death, Kouri had also forged Eric's signature on another policy valued at $100,000. It was also discovered that Kouri had been embezzling money from Eric's personal accounts and misusing funds from his business over several years. Kouri's financial situation was reportedly dire, despite claims that her house-flipping business was thriving. In reality, the business was millions of dollars in debt. According to Eric's family representative, Kouri urgently needed money. A premarital agreement, signed by Kouri, revealed that she had waived her claim to Eric's business assets. However, if Eric were to die before her while they were still married, she would inherit the assets. Kouri's lawyer denied the claims that her business was in debt. They explained that taking out lines of credit was a normal part of the house flipping business, and that the debt would be paid off when the houses were sold. The lawyer also clarified that the large amount of debt mentioned by the spokesperson was simply a result of normal business transactions. Kouri's mother, Lisa, stated that Eric had been very supportive of Kouri's business ventures, especially when it came to buying Heejin, where they were celebrating on the night of his death. Heejin was situated on a 10-acre estate in Heber Valley, close to popular ski resorts and Deer Creek Reservoir. Kouri discovered a long-abandoned mansion that had been built in 2017. She joined forces with a group of investors to make a substantial offer on the property, using their collective resources to finance the purchase. Her plan was to transform the estate into a popular recreational destination. Although Eric initially seemed to support the purchase, his family later disputed this claim. They recalled that Eric had strongly opposed the idea of buying Heejin and had even argued with Kouri about it. The family's spokesperson made a shocking allegation: on the night of Eric's death, Kouri had given him a drink spiked with fentanyl. Furthermore, they claimed that this was not the first time Kouri had attempted to harm Eric. Eric's family claims Kouri tried to harm him twice. First, during a 2019 trip to Greece, they say Kouri gave Eric a drink that made him violently ill. Kouri's brother Ronnie disputes this, suggesting Eric was taking antibiotics and shouldn't have had liquor. Ronnie says the bartender may have made a mistake, preparing a drink with liquor instead of the virgin drink Eric ordered. A second incident allegedly occurred on Valentine's Day 2022, 1 month before Eric's death. Kouri brought Eric a sandwich that caused him to break out in hives and have trouble breathing. The court documents stated that 2 days after Eric's death, Kouri punched his sister Amy in the neck and face when she tried to open a safe containing between $125,000 and $165,000 in cash. Kouri claimed she was acting in self-defense when she tried to retrieve important documents from a safe. However, she was charged with assault a month after the incident and eventually pleaded no contest. In June 2023, Kouri attended a bail hearing, which lasted 4 hours. During the hearing, prosecutors presented 3 witnesses and evidence to support their claim that Kouri had poisoned her husband. A cell phone expert testified about Google searches found on Kouri's phone, including inquiries about retrieving deleted text messages from an iPhone, whether the FBI could access deleted messages, and the lethal dose of fentanyl. However, Kouri's attorney argued that these searches were conducted after her husband's death, as Kouri sought information to defend herself against accusations of murder. Prosecutors also contacted the lead detective involved in the case and questioned him about any potential sources that Kouri could have used to obtain the drugs that were used to kill Eric. The detective shared information from an interview with Carmen Labor, a woman who claimed to work as a cleaner for Kouri's business and home. In early 2022, Carmen told investigators about a conversation she had with Kouri. Kouri asked her to buy fentanyl for an investor who supposedly had a back injury. Carmen, who had a history of drug-related crimes and was on probation for distributing drugs at the time of the interview, agreed to Kouri's request. She said she bought 15 to 30 fentanyl pills and later met with Kouri to exchange them for cash. This exchange happened on February 11, 2022, just 3 days before Valentine's Day, when Kouri allegedly tried to poison Eric with a sandwich. During the investigation, Carmen told the detective that Kouri contacted her again, asking for stronger drugs. This time, Carmen revealed that Kouri paid her for the pills with a check. A week after Eric's death, Kouri gave Carmen a $1,300 check. However, Kouri's lawyer disputed this, suggesting that the check could have been for cleaning services instead of payment for drugs. The detective agreed that this was a possible explanation. Kouri's lawyer also questioned Carmen's credibility, pointing out that she was a convicted felon on probation for serious crimes. The lawyer argued that Carmen's history made her an unreliable witness. They claimed that Carmen might have lied about selling the drugs because the detective told her she would face a long prison sentence if she didn't cooperate with the investigation. Kouri's lawyer asked if there was any physical evidence to prove that Carmen had bought the drugs. The detective replied that no such evidence existed. Specifically, no text messages were found where Kouri directly asked Carmen for drugs. Additionally, no witnesses came forward to confirm that they saw Carmen and Kouri exchanging drugs. Eric's sister pleaded with the judge at the bail hearing to keep Kouri in custody, sharing the family's trauma and concerns about reliving the horrific circumstances of Eric's death if Kouri was released on bail. The judge granted the request and denied Kouri bail. However, Kouri's family was upset by the decision and worried about her well-being in jail. They felt that her time in custody was affecting her physically and mentally. Kouri experienced a health scare in jail after taking prescribed medication. She suffered a seizure and was rushed to the hospital. She claimed that jail officials had given her the wrong medication, leading to severe side effects. Thankfully, Kouri recovered after receiving medical treatment. Jail officials found a handwritten letter in Kouri's cell after she was hospitalized. The letter was never sent, but it was included in the court records and presented by prosecutors as evidence. They claimed it was written by Kouri to her mother and showed her intentions and motivations. Prosecutors asked the court to limit Kouri's contact with her mother and brothers in November 2023. The main reason was the letter found in Kouri's cell, which prosecutors said was an attempt to influence witnesses. They alleged that in the letter, Kouri gave her mother instructions on how her brother Ronnie should behave in court. Kouri allegedly asked Ronnie to lie about Eric's behavior during a trip to Mexico. Specifically, Kouri wanted Ronnie to falsely testify that Eric had admitted to buying pain pills in Mexico. Kouri also told Ronnie to gather text messages from Eric that discussed his drug use. Kouri stressed the importance of linking Eric's activities in Mexico to his alleged involvement with drugs. However, Kouri claimed that the letter was not an attempt to tamper with a witness, but rather a work of fiction. A judge agreed, stating that the prosecution had failed to prove that Kouri was attempting to interfere with the testimony. Currently, Kouri and her family are trying to gain custody of their 3 sons, who are living with a relative. Despite being in jail, Kouri regularly talks to her children through video calls. Her family attends their public events, but is not allowed private visits with they. Kouri faces severe penalties if found guilty of murdering her husband Eric by lacing his drink with fentanyl. She could receive a prison sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. Moreover, she is dealing with multiple civil lawsuits related to Eric's estate, including disputes over custody of their children. The outcome of these custody battles has significant financial implications, as control of the children grants control over Eric's estate, fueling tensions between Kouri's and Eric's families. Kouri's trial is expected to begin sometime in 2025. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Lang. Michelle was an intelligent and motivated individual who enrolled in the University of Technology in Sydney, where she studied economics and hospitality management. She was an adventurous person who loved to travel, take risks, and explore new places. Her social media profiles revealed a vibrant personality who enjoyed posting photos and videos of her outings with friends. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Michelle posted videos and photos from her trips to various locations in New South Wales. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point, where she took a prophetic photo of herself on the edge of a cliff. Michelle was confident, outgoing, and had a busy life, balancing her studies with a part-time job and a social life. Michelle Lang went to a mall on April 2, 2016, and boarded a train after lunch. She got off at a station around 4:30 p.m. and was never seen again. 2 days later, her uncle went to the train station to meet his wife, who had returned from a business trip. And that's when they realized Michelle was missing. Her family became worried when they couldn't contact her, as she was always in daily contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. They inspected her room, which was in complete order, and looked through her laptop, concluding that she hadn't returned from her day out. On April 24, 2016, a body was found by tourists at Snapper Point, and a compiled sketch of the victim confirmed it was Michelle. The police took 3 days to officially identify her and launch an investigation. The first theory was that Michelle had been attacked by an unknown person she had planned to meet that day. However, CCTV cameras showed Michelle was alone on the day of her disappearance, and her friends said she had no plans to meet anyone. An investigation into her social networks and correspondence found no evidence of a secret meeting. The autopsy revealed Michelle's body had multiple injuries, including stab wounds, indicating she had tried to fight off her attacker. The police believe she was brutally assaulted before her death, but it's unclear who could have attacked her in such a lonely area. Forensic evidence showed Michelle's body had been in the water for less than 48 hours, meaning it was likely dumped recently. The police studied CCTV and traffic cameras to determine Michelle's last movements and continued to interview her family members, friends, and co-workers for additional information. Police Inspector Gary Jubilin said Michelle was a responsible person who always stayed in touch with her family, which made her disappearance unusual. The police were suspicious of Derek Barrett, Michelle's uncle, who had been unemployed and often stayed up late, but they found no evidence linking him to the crime. The investigators began questioning Derek about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to recall the last time he had seen her. Under pressure, Derek refused to answer and demanded a lawyer. This suspicious behavior raised doubts, leading to his arrest as a suspect. Before the interrogation, investigators had checked Derek's cell phone signal and found that he was in the same area where Michelle's body was later discovered on April 24th. Surveillance footage from a parking lot also showed a car matching the description of Derek's vehicle in the early morning hours of April 24th. Despite Derek's denials, the footage proved his presence in the parking lot. The police charged Derek, 27, with the murder of 25-year-old Michelle Lang, whose naked body with multiple stab wounds was found in a hole on the central Nsworth coast. Michelle's family was left in shock, especially her mother, who was devastated by the news. Police released CCTV footage showing Michelle's last shopping trip in Sydney's central business district on April 21st. The footage showed her shopping at a Pitt Street mall and boarding a train at St. James Station. Police believe Michelle returned to her family home in the afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin. She was presumed to have been murdered at home. The autopsy revealed that Michelle had tried to fight off her attacker and was stabbed multiple times in defense. CCTV footage also captured a vehicle entering Lake Moan-Morick National Park at around 7 a.m. on April 24th, with Michelle's body believed to be inside. Despite Derek being detained and charged, the investigation continued, and further details of Michelle's final minutes surfaced. Additional charges were laid, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a filming device, and murder. The investigation revealed that Derek had an unhealthy sexual interest in his wife's young niece. Analysis of Derek's cell phone found previously deleted data, including files that left no doubt about his involvement in Michelle's death and his unhealthy interest in her. The phone contained images taken just before Michelle's death, showing her returning home on April 21st around 5 p.m. and sending her last text message around midnight. Derek had set up a hidden camera in the shared bathroom, which he regularly reviewed. The phone also contained images of Michelle taken before her death. It appeared that Derek had entered Michelle's room around midnight, attempting to take photos and videos of her while she was asleep. However, Michelle woke up, and Derek attacked her, tying her up and putting duct tape over her mouth. He kept her tied to the bed for 2 days, periodically abusing her and taking photos. Michelle was still alive on April 23rd when Derek took a picture of her around 8 a.m. Later that day, Derek's stepson came home twice but didn't hear Michelle's quiet moans because Derek was taking a shower at the time. Surveillance cameras showed that Derek left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash, presumably after Michelle had already died. During this time, Derek cleaned the house thoroughly, washing away any traces of blood and hiding evidence of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. The next day, April 24th, at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point, stopping at a gas station to buy drinks and fill up his car with gas, where he was caught on CCTV cameras. When he arrived at Snapper Point, he got rid of Michelle's body and took some pictures around 9 a.m. Afterwards, he visited his parents, who didn't notice anything unusual about his behavior, and then returned home, waiting for his wife to return. Derek reported that he hadn't seen Michelle and that she hadn't come home, even accompanying his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held, and Derek's lawyer, Bill Whitby, told the court that Derek was pleading not guilty and was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. However, it was revealed that Derek had taken illegal drugs the day before killing Michelle, and he claimed to have only vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle's body off the cliff. Forensic psychologist Dr. Richard first disputed Derek's claims of memory loss, testifying that Derek was mentally fit to be punished to the full extent of his sentence. Dr. first testified that the drugs Derek was taking did not cause memory loss, and that all of his actions, from the murder to the disposal of the body, were clear and purposeful. The doctor also stated that Derek's IQ, concentration, and memory were within normal limits, and that the number of stab wounds indicated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses. The psychologist rejected Derek's claim that he did not feel sexually attracted to the victim and believed that Derek faked amnesia to avoid taking responsibility for the crime. A doctor, Richard, disputed Derek Barrett's claim, stating it was self-defeating because it was clear that the suspect had gained weight during the time period in question. Judge Wilson, a seasoned criminal defense attorney with 30 years of experience, expressed her skepticism about Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom, describing it as insincere and akin to that of a psychopath. She believed that Barrett's crime was not the result of a drunken night or poor life choices, but rather a deliberate act. During the retrial hearing, Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Michelle Lang, as well as sneaking into her room while she slept and making videos. He also admitted taking 19 explicit photos of her shortly before her death. Barrett claimed he couldn't remember the 48-hour period during which he committed the crime because he was under the influence of illegal substances. Judge Wilson, however, did not believe Barrett's claim of memory loss, nor did she believe he was genuinely sorry for his actions. The Lang family consoled each other, while Barrett wiped away tears and said that he deserved to live and that this should never have happened. Judge Wilson sentenced Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2050. Barrett showed no emotion when sentenced. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Jiang, thanked the Australian and Chinese communities for their support during her time of grief. She also thanked the NSW police, including Detective Inspector Gary Jubilan, for investigating her daughter's death. A fund was set up to pay for Miss Lang's funeral and to support her mother when she returns to China. Tragically, Michelle Lang's story did not end there. 4 years after the crime, inexplicable events occurred in one family where a woman often visited her elderly mother. In a surprising discovery, A woman found an unknown USB device in her elderly mother's hands during a visit. When the daughter plugged the USB drive into her computer, she was shocked to find graphic videos and photos of obscene content. The police were contacted, and an investigation revealed that the USB drive contained 9 video files lasting over an hour and 13 files with photos of Michelle Lang being abused shortly before her murder on April 23, 2016. The woman who found the USB drive lived about 4 miles from Derek Barrett's former home and had no discernible connection to him. It remains a mystery where the USB drive came from and how it ended up in the woman's family home. Police were able to match the photos on the USB drive to those that Derek Barrett had deleted from his phone before his arrest in an attempt to hide his crimes. In 2020, Barrett was charged with multiple sex offenses after the disturbing content was found on the USB drive in November 2019. Prosecutors admitted they were stumped by the discovery of the device, which led to new charges. The elderly woman with dementia was confined to her home, and it is unclear how the USB drive ended up in her possession. Thanks to the new evidence, Derek Barrett's sentence was extended without parole. The horrific discovery of the USB drive in the hands of an elderly woman in a leafy Sydney suburb resulted in the convicted criminal receiving additional years of punishment. The story of Michelle Lang stands as a heartbreaking reminder to appreciate the preciousness of life, since the future is uncertain and can change in an instant. After her passing, tributes poured in from friends and acquaintances on Chinese and Australian social media, emphasizing the devastating and lasting effects of bullying, fear, and criminal behavior. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Tara Lynn Grant. Hi everyone, today we're diving into the baffling case of a mother who disappeared from her home under mysterious circumstances. The police launched an exhaustive investigation, unearthing surprising and even bizarre clues. As they pieced together the truth, even seasoned detectives were left stunned. This case quickly became one of the most sensational in the country, with its shocking details leaving everyone outraged. Tara Grant was born on June 22, 1972, in Michigan. She grew up on a farm with her parents and sister, developing a deep love for the outdoors, horseback riding, and helping with the farm animals. In school, Tara was a sports enthusiast, participating in cheerleading, basketball, and the school band. After graduating, she attended the University of Michigan, where she met her future husband, Stephen. The couple started dating and soon tied the knot after her graduation. Tara, armed with a business degree, landed a job at a large international company. Stephen, who had ambitions in politics, initially worked as an assistant to a state senator during his university days. However, when the senator retired, Stephen found himself without a job and began working at his father's small tool-making shop. 4 years after their wedding, the couple welcomed a daughter, followed by a son a few years later. They then purchased a new home in a prestigious Macomb County, Michigan neighborhood just outside of Detroit. By this time, Tara had made substantial career progress, but it came at a cost. Her job required frequent travel, often to different states and countries, limiting her to weekend visits with her family. As a result, Stephen assumed most of the childcare responsibilities. His flexible schedule at his father's company allowed him to spend more time with the kids, but juggling work and childcare remained a challenge. To alleviate this, they decided to hire a full-time nanny. Through a special program, they found a young woman from Germany who would live with them and care for their children. Thanks to Tara's job, they could afford this arrangement, and the new nanny quickly bonded with their children, taking on most childcare duties. With his newfound free time, Stephen also started working part-time as a youth soccer coach. But despite their comfortable financial situation, Tara's constant absence put a strain on her relationship with Stephen. With her only being home on weekends, their arguments became more frequent. Tara held on to the hope that her next promotion would allow her to adjust her schedule and spend more quality time at home, But until then, she was constantly away on business trips. This uneasy routine continued until February 14, 2007, when an unexpected turn of events unfolded. On Valentine's Day, Stephen grew concerned and called the police, reporting that Tara had been out of touch for 5 days, a rarity. He recounted the events of February 9th, when Tara returned from a business trip, only to announce she had to leave a day early, leaving them with just 1 day together. The tension between them escalated into another argument, and Tara began packing her suitcase. Stephen overheard her making a hushed phone call, saying, "I'll be waiting at the end of the street," before she swiftly departed, getting into a dark-colored car. Since then, Tara had been unreachable, ignoring all of Stephen's calls. The police's first question was why Stephen had waited 5 days to report Tara's disappearance. But Stephen claimed he hadn't been initially concerned, thinking she'd simply left early for her business trip, and was ignoring his calls due to their recent argument. However, as the days passed, he began to worry when she failed to contact the kids, aged 3 and 7, as she normally did when away. Then, on Monday, Tara's boss called to say she'd missed a meeting, which was highly unusual and suggested she hadn't gone to work at all. Stephen informed Tara's relatives about her disappearance, but they were skeptical, assuming she'd taken a break from him and their constant arguing. After all, Tara had confided in her parents about the strain her job was putting on their relationship and the frequent rows that had become a regular feature of their lives. Her relatives thought she'd soon return home, needing time and space from Stephen. As time passed, Tara's absence continued, and her silence persisted. Eventually, Stephen's concern turned to worry, and he contacted the police. During the police interrogation, the officers noticed several suspicious scratches on Stephen's body. When questioned about a possible physical altercation with his wife, Stephen attributed the marks to his frequent work with metal parts at his father's shop, citing regular scratches as an occupational hazard. Following the station interview, the detectives requested a search of the couple's home, which Stephen granted. Upon arrival, they found that all of Tara's belongings, including her personal documents and purse, were missing, along with her luggage. Stephen also provided access to Tara's computer, allowing the detectives to review her bank account activity. The lack of transactions since her disappearance seemed unusual, as one would expect some financial activity if she had indeed traveled, such as booking a flight or hotel. During the search of the house, detectives failed to uncover any clues that could explain Tara's disappearance. With no signs of a crime, they were left to retracing her steps since February 9th. The local police department, accustomed to handling minor disputes and non-violent incidents in the area, was inexperienced in investigating such cases, given the region's reputation as one of the safest in the country. Stephen was outraged when asked to take a polygraph test, feeling accused by the police. He tearfully insisted he would never harm his wife. The police departed, considering their next moves, but Stephen surprisingly called them the following morning, ready to cooperate. However, just moments later, his lawyer intervened, advising against the interrogation. The police had no choice but to focus on Stephen as the prime suspect, being Tara's husband. Standard procedure aside, they had no other leads to pursue. Tara's relatives, friends, and colleagues all claimed to have had no contact with her since February 9th and were clueless about her whereabouts. Moreover, her bank account remained inactive, despite her likely need for financial transactions. Detectives shifted their focus to Stephen, and it didn't take long to uncover an important detail. His driver's license had been revoked, yet he continued to drive. They waited for him to get behind the wheel and then arrested him. However, Stephen still felt like he was being treated as a suspect and refused to cooperate with the police. His lawyer quickly secured his release, and Stephen returned home. The police persisted in their search for clues, obtaining Tara's mobile phone records in the process. They found that her last call was made on the day she vanished, when she called Stephen from the airport, saying she'd be home soon. After that, Stephen made numerous calls to her, but they all went to voicemail. The detectives listened to these recordings in which Stephen repeatedly asked her to answer or call back, accusing her of neglecting their children. He also pleaded with her to come home for their sake. The phone itself was turned off, and according to the cell phone carrier's data, it last connected to cell towers near Tara's house on the evening of her disappearance. Notably, there were no incoming calls during that period. As we recall, Stephen revealed that Tara had received a call before leaving the house, with the caller stating she would wait for her on the street. However, upon reviewing Stephen's voicemail recordings, detectives sensed genuine concern for his wife's well-being, accompanied by anger towards her decision to leave their children behind. Despite this, they didn't clear him as a suspect just yet. The investigation stalled, yielding no new leads, as Stephen persisted in refusing police cooperation, accusing them of misallocating resources on him rather than focusing on finding Tara. Conversely, he actively courted the media, which began extensive coverage of the case from its early stages. Tara's enigmatic disappearance sparked widespread public interest, and Stephen became a constant presence in front of cameras, daily pleading for her safe return. As the case unfolded, the company that had facilitated the hiring of the nanny for Stephen and Tara took action, ultimately deciding to send her back to Germany. Prior to her departure, she provided a statement to the authorities, speaking highly of her experience in their household. She also revealed that on the evening Tara returned home, she had been out at a bar with friends. Upon her return, she encountered Stephen, who appeared distraught, informing her that Tara had just exited the house. Despite refusing to cooperate with the police, Stephen hired a former FBI agent as a private detective to investigate Tara's disappearance. However, this effort also yielded no results. With no leads, the police decided to take a different approach. They contacted the agency that helped Tara and Stephen find their nanny, and there they made an interesting discovery. Before hiring the nanny from Germany, the couple had employed 6 other nannies, none of whom stayed in the job for long. When detectives spoke to these former nannies, almost all described Stephen's behavior as not only strange, but also intimidating. According to their accounts, Stephen would rummage through their belongings, ask them inappropriate questions, and frequently yell at them, treating them like they were his subordinates. The police were puzzled by the stark contrast between these descriptions and the German nanny's glowing account of her time with the family. They obtained permission to monitor her emails and phone calls, which led to a surprising revelation. Detectives uncovered messages between the nanny and Stephen, revealing that they had been having an affair. It turned out that the 19-year-old nanny had been in a romantic relationship with Stephen during Tara's business trips, and this continued until she was forced to leave the country. Although the police considered Stephen's infidelity a significant lead, it did not directly link him to Tara's disappearance. Thus, they continued searching for additional evidence. During interviews with Tara's relatives and friends, detectives discovered that almost everyone had disliked Stephen since she married him. They described him as behaving strangely, trying to control her every move, and having poor relationships with her family members. The investigation further revealed that Stephen's former girlfriend, whom he dated before meeting Tara, contacted the police with some information. She disclosed that Stephen had reached out to her several months prior, and their conversations gradually became more intimate over time. Stephen eventually expressed his desire to start a he took on almost all parenting responsibilities and was a better mother than she was. When reporters asked about their financial situation and whether he had been living mostly on Tara's money, Stephen became angry and insisted he didn't need a penny from her. During the interview, Stephen made accusations of infidelity against Tara, but he failed to provide any evidence to support his claims. Throughout the conversation, he consistently denigrated Tara, emphasizing the difficulties he had faced in their marriage. Meanwhile, the detectives made significant progress in their investigation. Previously, they had been unable to obtain a search warrant for Tara's home due to lack of sufficient grounds, and Stephen had refused to grant them voluntary access. However, after the discovery of the blood-stained bag in the park, the judge finally granted the warrant. As the police arrived at the house, Stephen returned from the interview. Upon being informed of the search warrant, he unlocked the door for the detectives before contacting his lawyer. The lawyer asked the police if his client, Stephen, was under arrest, and they replied that he was not. Stephen then announced that he would take his dog for a walk, retrieved it from the house, and left the premises while the police conducted a search. As the police searched the house room by room, they eventually reached the garage, where one of the detectives spotted a large green container holding several plastic bags. Upon opening one of the bags, they discovered an unknown substance along with what appeared to be women's clothing. Opening another bag, the officer was horrified to find what likely were human remains. In total, the container held 5 bags, and the detectives quickly confirmed that they contained the remains of a woman. The police realized that they had found Tara's body and that Stephen was likely her killer. However, Stephen had not returned, so the police immediately launched a search for him, fearing he might flee or harm someone else, knowing that he would likely face prison time. Meanwhile, officers called in reinforcements to search the nearby park, as only a portion of Tara's remains were found in the garage. Over 100 officers from neighboring districts were dispatched to assist in the search. Their efforts quickly paid off, as they found another part of the body several hundred yards from where the bag was discovered, and later they found the head. Due to the cold temperatures, the remains were well preserved, allowing detectives to confirm that they belonged to Tara. As the search continued, the police found several more body parts, and when night fell, the search was suspended until morning. All this time, detectives were also trying to track down Stephen, but they were unsuccessful. They contacted his friends, and one of them came forward, saying Stephen had phoned him to let him know the police were searching his house and asking for a ride from the street. The friend drove to the location and picked Stephen up, taking him to his own home. During the drive, the friend noticed Stephen's strange behavior. He was terrified, his hands were trembling, and it seemed like he was on the edge of a nervous collapse. Once they arrived at the friend's house, Stephen asked to see his kids and requested to borrow the friend's car. At the time, Stephen's children were living in another state with his sister. The friend handed over his pickup truck, and Stephen took off. The police asked for information about Stephen's phone and credit cards, which enabled them to rapidly trace his journey. They found that Stephen had made several cash withdrawals on his way to the neighboring state and had phoned his sister, leading the police to conclude that he was heading towards his children. They immediately set off in that direction. Just then, an unexpected call came in from Germany. It was from the nanny with whom Stephen had previously been in a romantic relationship. She informed the police that Stephen had just called her, confessing to killing Tara. According to Stephen, the couple had an argument that evening, during which he yelled at her. Tara slapped him in the face, and in a fit of rage, he pushed her, causing her to fall and hit her head on the floor, resulting in her death. The police had no doubt about Stephen's involvement, but they still had to track him down. They searched the area along the highway to the neighboring state for several hours and eventually found the car belonging to Stephen's friend abandoned near the entrance to the national park. However, Stephen himself was nowhere to be found. The police then focused their search on the park, and several hours later, with the help of thermal cameras, they finally located him. He was lying under a tree, wearing only light clothing, and the officers realized he was on the verge of dying from hypothermia. In an altered state, Stephen was talking to trees and muttering incoherent phrases. The police quickly airlifted him to the hospital. Doctors managed to save his life. However, it took some time for Stephen to fully recover. While in the hospital, Stephen was charged with murder, and the detectives handed the case over to the court on the same day. Notably, his lawyer withdrew from defending him, citing that he needed to be able to look at himself in the mirror in the mornings when asked why. A new lawyer was assigned to Stephen, and meanwhile, forensic experts examined Tara's remains. A renowned pathologist who had worked on high-profile cases, such as the J.F. Kennedy and John Bennett Ramsey cases, was appointed as the chief medical examiner. After examining the remains, the pathologist concluded that Stephen's initial account of events did not align with reality. Stephen had claimed that Tara died from a head injury, but the actual cause of death was revealed to be strangulation. When Stephen regained consciousness, detectives visited him in the hospital, and he told them what truly happened that evening. He confessed that when Tara came home and announced she had to leave earlier, they got into an argument, and he started yelling at her. As she tried to leave the room, he grabbed her and Tara hit him in the face. Enraged, Stephen retaliated and then strangled her. Stephen dragged Tara's body from the second floor to the garage and put her in the trunk of her own car. At the same time, the nanny returned home, and Stephen lied to her, saying his wife had just left him. The next morning, he took the body to his father's workshop, making sure he was alone. There, he destroyed all of Tara's documents and personal belongings, and then dismembered her body using a saw. This gruesome task made him vomit twice, but he kept telling himself that if he didn't do it, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. After several hours, he packed the remains into plastic bags and put them in a container. He then returned home, leaving the body in the car for a few days. During this time, he was thinking of ways to get rid of the body without arousing suspicion. To create an alibi, he repeatedly called Tara's phone and left messages on her voicemail, pleading with her to come home. One day, Stephen took his children's snow sled to the park, where the bags containing human remains would later be discovered. He placed a container on the sled and pulled it up a hill, away from the crowded areas. However, the rope slipped out of his hands, and the sled rolled down the hill, causing the container to overturn and the bags to spill out. Stephen picked up the bags, put the container back on the sled, and eventually buried them under the snow in a remote area before returning home. Days later, when the police started searching for Tara, detectives announced they were launching a search operation in the park. Stephen became anxious, as he knew one of the bags, the largest one, was not hidden well and feared it would be found quickly. He went to the park, retrieved a few bags, and carried them to his father's workshop, leaving them on the roof. The day before his interview, Stephen took a container from his home to the workshop, retrieved some bags from it, and brought them back to his garage. The next day, the police obtained a search warrant for his house and found the bags in the container, which led to Stephen's confession. It turned out that Stephen had planned to take his own life rather than surrender, but he couldn't follow through with it, even after nearly freezing to death. During his conversation with the police, Stephen showed no remorse for his actions and would often smile and joke, even when discussing how he got rid of the body. While awaiting trial in prison, Stephen's children stayed with his sister. However, Tara's family was unhappy with this arrangement, and eventually, they managed to have the children moved to Tara's sister's care. Although Stephen's family still had visitation rights, Tara's relatives were relieved to have the children out of his sister's hands, especially given her continued sympathy for Stephen and her insensitive jokes about Tara's murder. The trial started in November 2007, and Stephen admitted his guilt from the outset. Despite this, his new lawyer attempted to secure a lighter sentence by highlighting the marital issues that had been plaguing Stephen and his wife for years, largely due to her frequent absences. However, evidence presented during the trial contradicted Stephen's claim that Tara had been planning to leave a day earlier. Her boss testified that she had no additional meetings scheduled and was expected to start work at her usual time. This was corroborated by Tara's sister, who had spoken with her shortly before the murder and was told that she would be home all weekend as usual. Furthermore, there was no credible evidence to suggest that Tara was having an affair. Her boss confirmed that their relationship was purely professional, and this was supported by their email exchanges and text messages. Even Stephen himself acknowledged that he had no basis for believing this. Ultimately, the prosecution was unable to prove that Stephen had planned the murder in advance. It appeared that he had committed the crime in a fit of rage, which could have led to a charge of second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder. On December 21, 2007, a jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict against Stephen, and he received a minimum 50-year prison sentence. Despite his lawyer's efforts to appeal the verdict, it was unsuccessful. Stephen has since been serving his sentence in prison, but there is more to his story. The murder of Tara garnered widespread national attention, and Stephen seemed to revel in the notoriety. While incarcerated, he began writing a book and sought his sister's assistance to have it published. They even explored the possibility of adapting it into a film, with Stephen considering which renowned actor could portray him. In 2008, new information emerged. Stephen's children confided in their aunt, revealing that they had actually seen their father kill their mother on that fateful evening. They had come out of their room after hearing screams and witnessed the entire traumatic event. When this news broke in the media, Stephen's relatives accused the children of lying and continued to defend him. In the same year, it was also discovered that Stephen's father, who had not supported his son, was overcome with grief and guilt, and his body was found in his own home. To this day, Stephen remains in prison, and he will not be eligible for parole until 2058. Every year, Tara's relatives and friends organize a marathon along the route in the park where she used to jog regularly, and her children always participate. Despite their father's heinous actions, they have found the strength to move forward and honor their mother's memory. Hello friends, welcome to Recovered from the Furnace, including a bracelet, necklace, and ring. Following a meticulous forensic of Warsaw, brutally killed Varka Rani just a few months into their marriage. The news sent shockwaves through both Josvir's and Varka's families. Josvir's family struggled to come to terms with their son's sexuality, while Varka's family was consumed by grief. The evidence against Josvir was overwhelming, and he was subsequently taken into custody and brought to trial at Wolverhampton Crown Court. Although Josvir initially attempted to denial and deceive to avoid punishment, he was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment after a grueling 3-month trial. Furthermore, he would be ineligible for parole for at least 20 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Liana Friedenbach. Liana Friedenbach and Felipe Cafe, the young people involved in this tragedy, came from different backgrounds. Liana, born in May 1987 in São Paulo, was the elder of 2 children in a wealthy and respected family. Her father, Henry Friedenbach, was a successful lawyer and a well-known figure in the city. Felipe Silva Cafe, also from São Paulo, was born in July 1984, but grew up in a large, modest family. From a young age, he worked part-time to support himself and help his family. They met at school and developed a strong friendship that blossomed into romance. However, they had to keep their relationship a secret. Liana's parents, who were strict and religious, had brought her up to attend Sunday school and church regularly and were opposed to her dating at such a young age. Social inequality also contributed significantly to the situation, as she came from a wealthy family while her partner was from a poor background. However, the parents' prohibitions did not deter the young lovers from staying together. Instead, they started secretly dating in various locations where they would not be seen, just to spend some time together. In the fall of 2003, the lovers decided to take a trip to a secluded area to be alone for a while. They carefully planned the trip, which was meant to be an exciting adventure for them. They came up with a believable alibi to justify their absence and avoid arousing suspicion. Felipe told his parents that he and his friends were going on a camping trip. Liana, on the other hand, told her parents that she was going on a sightseeing trip with some guys from church, knowing that they would not question her further. The Friedenbach and Cafe families believed the fabricated stories and let their children go without any concerns. Liana and Felipe were overjoyed that they could spend a whole week together, free from their parents' scrutiny and judgment. The young couple decided to visit the picturesque province of Iguazu. They packed lightly, bringing a tent, sleeping bags, some personal items, and a small supply of food. However, they faced a significant challenge. They had hardly any money. As students, they were entitled to free public transportation, so they planned their route in advance to reach their destination by bus. On the morning of October 31st, the lovers met at the agreed meeting point, careful not to be seen by anyone who knew them. They caught the first bus and, after arriving in another city in the evening, spent the night at the bus station. 2 more bus rides took them to their desired location. From there, they had to walk a few kilometers to a secluded spot in the woods where they planned to camp and spend a few days alone together. Despite their fatigue after the long journey, the warm and sunny day put them in high spirits, and they joked, laughed, and made plans for their mini vacation. Once they reached the spot marked on their map, they began setting up their modest but cozy camp. Liana and Felipe's plans were ruined by unwelcome visitors. When they traveled to a remote and secluded area, they didn't consider that poverty and crime often thrive in such places. Their arrival didn't go unnoticed, especially since they were well-dressed and carrying large backpacks and bags as they walked through the forest to the abandoned farm where they planned to stay. They caught the attention of local bandits, Paulo Cesar de Silva Marquez, nicknamed Perron Buku, and Roberto Alves Cardoso, known as Chino, who was only 16 but already led the gang. The bandits were interested in the strangers, particularly the beautiful young girl. They decided that the backpacks likely contained valuables and could be robbed. The bandits secretly followed the couple and watched from the underbrush. Liana and Felipe set up their tent, had a snack, and began to clean up their campsite. The bandits waited in ambush until they were certain no one else would join the couple and that they didn't have any weapons. Perron Buku and Chino then attacked Liana and Felipe, threatening them, and Felipe, frightened, didn't even try to run away or fight back against the unknown attackers. Having thoroughly searched all the bags and backpacks, the criminals found nothing of value. They then decided to demand a ransom from the boys' and girls' relatives. Liana, terrified, quickly revealed that she came from a wealthy family and her father would pay them any amount they demanded. The criminals were thrilled with this development, but lacking experience in such cases, they were unsure how to proceed to get the money and release the prisoners. As they refined their plan, the bandits tried to determine the value of their captives and the ransom they could demand. To prevent escape, they decided to hide the prisoners. Initially, they were taken to a rundown structure near the farm where they were staying, but it lacked windows and doors. Later, they were moved to the home of one of the gang members. There, Felipe was tied up and brutally beaten to prevent escape and resistance. That night, the gang members took turns abusing the bound and helpless Liana, ultimately breaking her spirit. The kidnappers were unable to figure out how to demand and collect a ransom, so they decided to kill the captives and hide their bodies in the woods, making it unlikely they would ever be found. After torturing the kidnappers took them to a remote area in the woods the following day. Pernambuco took the badly beaten Felipe deep into the forest, where a gunshot was heard, and then he returned alone. Liana realized what had happened and that her loved one was dead. Although the kidnappers tried to convince Liana that they had released Felipe, they had other sinister plans in mind for her. They intended to keep her captive as their plaything until they grew tired of her, especially since no one had begun searching for the missing boys at that time. A couple of days after Liana left, her parents discovered that there was no church excursion trip, and her friends were unaware of her whereabouts. The Friedenbach family suspected that Liana had run off with her boyfriend, Felipe, and immediately contacted his parents. However, Felipe's family believed he had gone camping with friends, so they couldn't assist in locating the couple. The situation was complicated by the fact that neither Liana nor Felipe had been in contact for several days, and their phones were turned off. Thanks to the Friedenbach family's connections and resources, they were able to mobilize the entire city's police force to track the couple's trail, step by step. Through trickery, they managed to reconstruct the route the young people took after running away from home. The police arrived at Embu-Guasu, where the last bus had dropped them off, and from there they had to navigate through a deserted wooded area on foot. This was also the last location where their phones were still online. A massive search operation was launched, involving police officers, rescuers, and concerned citizens who had learned about the incident and wanted to help. A local businessman even offered his personal helicopter to aid in the search effort and distributed flyers with photos of the missing pair. The search party quickly found the couple's camp, but what they saw was chilling. Although there were no signs of bloodshed or struggle, it was clear that something horrific had taken place. The contents of their bags had been emptied and scattered about. Their tent had been sliced open from top to bottom with a knife, and the guys' phones were lying nearby. As the rescuers combed through the area, they soon stumbled upon Philippe's lifeless body. The young man had been shot in the back of the head at close range, and it was clear that he had never stood a chance. Although the chances of finding Liana alive were now extremely low, the searchers held on to hope, however slim. Henry Friedenbach actively sought the help of the press to widely publicize the search for Liana, ensuring that as many people as possible were aware of the situation. A substantial reward was offered for any information about her whereabouts, although unfortunately, this did not lead to a breakthrough in the case. Once the criminals had disposed of Felipe, they returned Liana to the same house where they had previously held both her and Felipe captive. By this time, the group of criminals had been joined by their accomplices, Antonio Gano da Silva and Agnaldo Pius Chino. Agnaldo, in particular, callously declared that Liana was now his property and that he had the freedom to do with her as he pleased. He then shockingly invited the others to indulge in their darkest desires with Liana, an invitation that was quickly accepted by the group. A day after the large-scale search operation began, the criminals relocated with their captive Liana to the house of Anthony Matias de Barros, another gang member. That evening, they took Liana with them when they went fishing. The ringleader showed a pretense of concern by putting his jacket over her due to the chilly weather. Later that evening, Chino's older brother, who was unaware of his siblings' illegal activities, arrived at the same location. Chino introduced Liana to his brother as his girlfriend, but the brother immediately recognized her as the girl the police were searching for. The brother took Chino aside and warned him that the police were closing in on them. Chino saw this as a warning and decided it was time to eliminate Liana and flee. He deceived Liana by telling her she was free to go and he would escort her to the road. However, he actually led her into the forest where he brutally stabbed her to death with a knife and then crushed her skull with a rock to ensure she was dead. Liana's body was discovered 5 days after the massacre, with no signs of life and severe mutilation. The key piece of evidence was the killer's jacket, which Liana was wearing. The perpetrators were not only cruel, cynical, and ruthless, but also incredibly stupid and short-sighted. Despite their brutality, they did not attempt to flee, hide, or destroy the physical evidence, believing they would never be caught. This overconfidence ultimately led to their quick identification and apprehension by the police. The ringleader, Chino, made a crucial mistake by leaving his jacket on Liana's body, which retained his sweat marks. He then took the murder weapon to his house, washing it and hiding it in the yard. He also tried to wash his blood-stained clothes so he could continue wearing them. However, DNA analysis ultimately linked the gang members to the crime, allowing the police to apprehend them almost simultaneously. The ringleader did not deny his involvement in the crime and instead chose to testify, bragging about kidnapping, abusing, and ultimately killing the victim, Liana. He provided a detailed account of her final days. Following a lengthy trial, most adult members of the criminal gang received severe sentences. However, the ringleader, Chino, was only 16 at the time of the crimes, so he was sent to a specialized juvenile prison with a relatively lenient regime. During his incarceration, Chino made multiple escape attempts and exhibited aggressive and inappropriate behavior, which led to a psychiatric evaluation. The examination revealed several mental abnormalities, which cumulatively turned him into a calculating sadist and murderer devoid of pity or remorse. Chino, responsible for the murder of young men, was sent to a secure medical facility for mandatory treatment and rehabilitation despite the family's numerous appeals. His living conditions are now comfortable, with a private room featuring a large TV, internet access, and a comfortable bed with an orthopedic mattress. He receives 4 balanced meals a day with a customized menu, and his monthly maintenance costs around approximately $2,500. In recent years, Chino has repeatedly requested his release, arguing that he has completed his treatment and no longer poses a threat to anyone, allowing him to resume his normal life. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Vicki Roberts. Vicki Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in Cheshire, England. She grew up in a conservative and religious family with an older sister. The sisters attended a Christian school where they developed their musical talents and sang in the choir. Vicki was known for being kind, friendly, and helpful, always willing to lend a hand. After high school, Vicki enrolled in university and worked part-time at an IKEA store to fund her education. That's where she met Michael Roberts, a charismatic and sociable young man who was only a year older than her. Michael was also a student and an athlete who took care of his appearance. Initially, Vicki found Michael too talkative and intrusive, but he eventually won her over with his charming personality. Michael was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, to a prominent chemical engineer and his family. As the eldest of 2 sons, Michael was raised with high expectations and strict discipline. His parents instilled in him the belief that he was destined for greatness, and Michael grew up to be ambitious, driven, and confident. He was a natural socialite, effortlessly making friends and commanding attention with his charismatic personality. His striking appearance, sense of humor, and intellectual curiosity only added to his charm. However, his parents' constant praise and emphasis on his superiority may have contributed to Michael's growing narcissism, which intensified over time. Michael desperately wanted to please his parents, so he strived to be the perfect son and meet their expectations. Meanwhile, Roberts, a womanizer, had a string of girlfriends and mistresses. He was skilled at secretly dating multiple people simultaneously, making each one believe they were the only one. He got a thrill from pursuing girls, particularly those who seemed out of his reach. One such girl was Vicki, who Michael was determined to win over. Initially, she kept him at arm's length, rejecting even his casual invitations to walk together after work or grab coffee. Vicki was a dedicated student and devoted her free time to church activities, leaving no room for dating or romance. It took Michael a few months to convince Vicki to go out with him. He won her over with his charming and sweet nature, showering her with flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even took her to meet his parents, who adored her and gave their seal of approval for their son's choice. Vicky was convinced of his sincerity and eventually agreed to be his girlfriend. Michael became her first love and for a while, her only one. She was deeply happy with him, and it seemed like destiny had brought them together. Michael, too, seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but their happiness was short-lived. From the outside, their relationship looked perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambitious, and had big plans for the future. However, Vicky soon discovered that Michael had an irrepressible sexual appetite and a passion for experimentation in bed. At first, Michael didn't pressure Vicky too much, fearing she would leave him. But once he was confident she wouldn't go anywhere, he revealed his true desires. The modest and religious Vicky was shocked by what was happening, but she was deeply in love with Michael and trusted him. For a long time, she kept their bedroom secrets hidden behind closed doors. Michael made her an official marriage proposal, which she happily accepted. She genuinely believed that after the wedding, her fiancé would stop his extreme experiments. Meanwhile, one of Vicky's closest friends began to notice that she was hiding bruises and small injuries under her clothes. The friend confronted Vicky, asking if her fiancé was abusing her and if she needed help. At first, Vicky denied everything, but eventually admitted that the marks were a result of her fiancé's extreme intimate experiments. Michael had a strong passion for bondage and using various toys and devices. Vicky confided in her friend that they had intimate encounters up to 5 times a day, but Michael still remained unsatisfied. He saw himself as a skilled lover, and intimacy was an art form and a way for him to express himself. Although Michael occasionally made concessions when Vicky refused to participate in some of his dangerous experiments, he usually managed to convince her to go along with his desires. After defending her diploma, Vic found herself facing an unplanned pregnancy, which prompted her to change jobs. She was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Around the same time, Michael left IKEA and began working as a sales consultant at a large retail chain selling electronics. Michael flourished in his new role, leveraging his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills to consistently exceed sales targets. As a result, he quickly rose through the ranks, earning a promotion to senior sales. The management even considered transferring him to the main office, but first he needed to undergo training and improve his qualifications. As Michael attended training sessions and traveled to London for business, he felt proud and accomplished. However, in the process, he began to neglect his young fiancée, Vic. He only seemed to remember her existence when he needed intimacy, and their relationship suffered as a result. They stopped talking, hardly spent time together, and outside of the bedroom, Vic seemed to be invisible to him. Michael started having numerous affairs with co-workers, clients, and mere acquaintances while simultaneously planning his wedding to Vicky. He had an insatiable appetite for intimacy with various women, which boosted his self-esteem and gave him a sense of accomplishment. When Vicky discovered she was pregnant, she excitedly shared the news with Michael, expecting him to expedite their wedding plans. However, Michael's reaction was one of anger and frustration. He insisted that Vicky terminate the pregnancy, citing their young age and the idea that they had their whole lives ahead of them to have children. Vicky was shocked by his demand, but refused to consider abortion, prompting Michael to try to persuade her through other means. Michael convinced the bride, Vicky, that if her religious parents found out she was pregnant and living with him out of wedlock, they would be furious. He promised that they would keep the abortion a secret and have children after they got married. Vicky was torn, but Michael's persuasive nature eventually won her over, and she had the procedure. However, the abortion came with complications, and Vicky spent several days in the hospital, followed by 3 weeks of recovery. The doctor strictly forbade her from having sex during this time, which sent Michael into a rage. It dawned on Vicky that Michael had mental health issues, and a sex addiction. Without intimacy, he became unhinged, often leaving the house, claiming he had urgent work matters to attend to. Vicky suspected that Michael was seeking intimacy outside their relationship, but she genuinely believed that everything would change after they got married, and she could help him overcome his infidelity. However, their 2-year engagement revealed a different reality. Michael had no intention of marrying Vicky, as his current situation suited him perfectly. He had a loyal fiancée at home who took care of his household needs, as well as multiple mistresses on the side, whom he regularly replaced. Vicky always took Michael's promises at face value, even when she discovered his infidelity. She forgave him as long as he assured her it was the last time and that he would change. However, as time passed, Vicky began to pressure Michael for marriage, as she wanted a complete family and children. Her parents also increasingly raised this question, but what ultimately pushed the issue was the insistence of Michael's parents, whom he didn't want to disappoint. Vicky was a kind and sweet person whom everyone loved. Her parents-in-law adored her and considered her an ideal match for their son. They were eager to see the couple get married and have grandchildren. With the help of their parents, the couple organized a grand wedding with all the trimmings, including a white dress and a limousine. The newlyweds looked happy and in love, with a long and fulfilling life ahead of them. After the wedding, the couple settled into a large and cozy house in a prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Robert's parents. However, what the relatives didn't know was that Michael had a dark side that Vicky was already well aware of. Despite being married, Michael did not love Vicky and only saw her as a way to appear normal in the eyes of others. Vicky never complained about Michael's infidelities and strange behaviors, and he was able to continue cheating on her without anyone suspecting a thing. At work, Michael was successful, earning promotions and a good salary after being transferred to a new office. Michael's direct supervisor, Carrie Hall, was a 10-year-old older, divorced mother who worked as the head of administration at Phones for You. Despite her busy schedule, she was attractive, well-groomed, and strong-willed as required by her position. For a long time, she ignored the signs of attention from her young subordinate, Michael. However, Michael saw this as a challenge and made a concerted effort to win her over, using his natural charm and eloquence. After about a month, Carrie reciprocated and they began a romantic relationship, secretly meeting in hotel rooms. Carrie described their relationship as turbulent, passionate, and experimental. As a mature, self-confident woman, Carrie was flattered by the attention of a younger man and was open to trying new things. With her, Michael could fulfill his fantasies that he couldn't with his modest wife. Michael frequently deceived his wife by claiming he was working late or attending corporate trainings, when in reality, he was meeting his mistress. He confided in his mistress about his unhappiness in his marriage, calling it a youthful mistake and expressing his willingness to divorce his wife. However, he failed to take action as his wife refused to grant him a divorce. The affair with Carrie lasted over a year, but she didn't pressure him for divorce. Content with their secret hotel trysts, physical marks, and risky games, Carrie, a sports enthusiast who always took pride in her figure, suddenly changed her style after starting a relationship with Michael. She began wearing long-sleeved, high-necked clothes, which was unusual for her. A concerned friend noticed the change and Carrie confided in her about Michael's unusual intimate preferences. She revealed that Michael enjoyed experimenting with rough, controlling behaviors, such as biting, squeezing, and tying her up. Carrie showed her friend the physical marks these activities had left on her body. Although her friend urged her to go to the police, Carrie refused, saying that she had consented to these activities and that Michael usually warned her beforehand. However, she admitted that things sometimes got out of control, like when Michael would strangle her to supposedly enhance her pleasure, causing her to lose consciousness. Despite fearing these strangulation games, Carrie continued to succumb to Michael's persuasion, hoping that he would eventually tire of these cruel experiments or that she would become desensitized to them. Michael's wife and mistresses didn't try to intervene. Before they got married, Vicky had already suspected Michael's infidelity through open letters and a love letter. Despite knowing about his affairs, she believed her love and care could transform him into an exemplary family man. However, after their wedding, the situation deteriorated, and Michael convincingly denied his cheating. Vicky decided to investigate her husband's infidelity by looking through his phone while he was asleep. She was shocked to discover numerous intimate conversations between Michael and Kouri, as well as other girls, including explicit photos. Despite her devastation, Vicky did not want to upset her family, so she kept the discovery to herself and moved in with a friend instead of telling her parents and sister. Before leaving, Vicky wrote a heartfelt letter to Michael, confessing her love for him and acknowledging that he was the central figure in her life. However, she also made it clear that she was aware of his infidelity and would not tolerate it. Vicky informed Michael that she was giving him time to reflect on their relationship, but she would not stay in the marriage if his behavior continued. She wrote the letter by hand and left it on the refrigerator for him to find. Michael didn't feel emotional about the message, nor was he upset by his wife's departure. However, he didn't want to lose the comfort of having a quiet and obedient partner who took care of the household and put up with his quirky behavior and unusual tastes. That same evening, Michael went to Vicky's friend's house, bringing a large bouquet of flowers. He got down on his knees, apologized, and begged Vicky to come back to him, promising to be faithful and making her his one and only. Vicky wanted to believe him and decided to return home, where a new mistress was waiting. Michael didn't stop seeing Kouri, but he became more cautious and even made an effort to come home for dinner, which his wife had carefully prepared. He deleted messages on his phone, changed the password on his social media profiles, and started an affair with a young employee named Karen Wilson, who was engaged to be married. Despite this, Michael pursued Karen relentlessly, making himself out to be a miserable and unhappy lover. He was so drawn to Karen that after 2 months, he decided to end things with 33-year-old Kouri Hall, whom he had grown tired of. Michael told Karen a fabricated story about being unhappy in his marriage and promised to leave his wife soon. Karen eventually gave in, and they became intimate in the office. A week later, she broke off her engagement and waited for Michael to follow through on his promise. Michael didn't plan to divorce Vicky, but he wanted to end their connection and start a new relationship with another woman. To achieve this, he lied to Vicky, telling her that he had already filed for divorce and moved in with his parents. This was a fatal mistake, as Vicky became suspicious that he was still cheating on her. Decided to take action, Vicky waited until Michael was in the shower and took his phone, but she found nothing incriminating because he had deleted all text messages and changed the password on his social media account. Undeterred, Vicky waited until Michael fell asleep and then took his work laptop, where she discovered his account on the social network was still active. On the laptop, she found conversations with his new girlfriend, in which he confessed his love, claimed to be divorcing his wife, and said he was living with his parents. The discovery was a huge shock for Vicky. She took screenshots of the intimate messages as proof of her husband's infidelity and saved them on her laptop. She also found several hotel room receipts in his wallet, which further implicated him. The next morning, Vicky confronted Michael with the evidence, and for the first time in their relationship, she lost her temper. Michael tried to apologize and promised to change, but Vicky threatened to tell his parents everything, hoping they could finally make him see sense. Michael was furious when his wife Vicky threatened to reveal his secrets to his parents. In a fit of rage, he slapped her. Vicky, determined to carry out her threat, got up and headed for the door. Michael caught up with her, grabbed a heavy jewelry box from the dressing table, and hit her twice on the head, knocking her unconscious. Then, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. With no remorse, Michael wrapped Vicky's lifeless body in a blanket, packed it into several large garbage bags, and carried it to the garage. He then quickly cleaned up the house, removing most of Vicky's belongings. After calling Karen, he invited her over and they had dinner, enjoying themselves in the same house where he had just murdered his wife. The next day, Michael ran off with Karen, leaving behind the scene of his crime. Michael told his parents that his wife had left him for another man. To convince them, he went to their home, cried on his mother's shoulder, and showed her messages on his wife's phone. But what he didn't reveal was that he had sent those messages himself, pretending to be his wife. The messages said that she had lost interest in him, met someone else, and wanted to live with this new person. Meanwhile, Michael also sent messages to his wife's parents from her phone, saying that she had fallen in love with someone else, left with him, and asked them not to contact her and give her space. The Smiths, concerned about their daughter Vicky, immediately tried to contact her, but their calls were consistently rejected. In response, they only received messages asking them to give her time, which seemed strange to them. They then decided to visit Michael's house to get some answers, but his story only raised more questions and doubts. When they discovered that Vicky had stopped showing up for work without warning, they became even more worried and decided to file a police report. On December 1, 2009, the police launched an investigation. It was discovered that Michael had purchased a shovel, rope, rags, and detergents from a hardware store that day, which seemed suspicious. However, he hadn't disposed of the body by the time the police arrived at his home. Although the police didn't find anything incriminating, Michael's behavior and story raised many questions. What was particularly striking was that they overlooked a large package in the corner of the garage. During the initial inspection of the marital home, no signs of the missing woman's clothes, documents, or personal belongings were found, suggesting that she might have voluntarily left. However, Vicky's laptop was discovered in the bedroom, and upon seizing it, the police found screenshots of Michael's conversations with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved. The police then requested a geolocation of Vicky's cell phone, which regularly received messages from her husband and relatives. The search revealed that the phone had been in the marital home the entire time. In a subsequent search of the Roberts' home, law enforcement officials made a disturbing discovery in the garage. But just as they were processing this new evidence, Michael suddenly vanished from under their noses, taking a wallet with cash that allowed him to remain hidden for several days. Michael's money ran out, so he turned to one of his mistresses, Lavina T., asking to stay with her for a while. However, one evening, she heard on the news that Michael was wanted for murdering his wife. Without hesitation, she reported his whereabouts to the police, leading to his arrest. When questioned, Michael broke down in tears, claiming he was innocent. He insisted that his wife's death was an accident, resulting from a consensual intimate game where she asked him to strangle her with a rope belt, but he overdid it. However, forensic experts uncovered contradictory evidence. The autopsy revealed that Michael's wife was strangled with bare hands, attacked from behind, and had 2 extensive hematomas on her head that occurred before her death, ruling out any connection to the alleged intimate game. Michael's trial began in January 2010, where he continued to plead innocence and hoped for leniency. Nevertheless, the autopsy results proved that Michael brutally hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her, hiding her body in the garage. Michael Roberts was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after serving 17 years. This means that, if he demonstrates good behavior, he may be eligible for release as early as 2027. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nancy Paola Reyes. Nancy Paola Reyes Gorsi was born on April 13, 1991, in Granados, Guatemala, to Jorge and Pren Gorsi, a poor family of 7. Despite their financial struggles, her parents were determined to provide their 5 children with a good education, hoping they would have better lives. Nancy excelled in school, which enabled her to enroll in the University of Villanova, where she earned a degree in business administration and document management with honors. However, her academic achievements did not immediately translate to career success. She worked part-time as a cashier and later became an administrator at a supermarket, but her professional growth stagnated. During her university years, Nancy was in an unregistered marriage with a man whose identity remains private, and they had 2 daughters together. Unfortunately, the relationship ended and the couple separated. The father of the children lost interest in their well-being and failed to provide financial support. Nancy lived with her parents and daughters, working at a supermarket with no clear future prospects. The family struggled financially, barely covering essential expenses. However, Nancy's older sister's decision to immigrate to the U.S. in 2013 changed everything. Her sister found a good job, got married, and settled down, inspiring Nancy to make a similar change. Instead of the U.S., Nancy chose to relocate to sunny Spain. The problem was that Nancy didn't have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone cover initial expenses. So she worked hard for several years, saving diligently until she finally had enough money to make her dream a reality. In July 2018, Nancy bought a ticket to Madrid, promising her parents she would stay in touch to alleviate their worries. Her plan was to find a place to live and a job upon arrival, with a few €1,000 to cover rent, food, and essentials until she could secure a steady income. When Nancy left, she was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. After a brief stay in Madrid, Nancy moved to Barcelona and later settled in Cádiz, the capital of the province of Cádiz, Spain. She kept in close touch with her family, calling home almost every day to check in on them and regularly sending money to support them. Over time, her remittances enabled her parents not only to support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Although Nancy didn't have a steady job, she made a living by doing odd jobs like cleaning houses for wealthy families and caring for the elderly and sick. Despite the challenges, Nancy never complained and was optimistic about her decision to move to Europe, where she believed she had more opportunities. She was convinced that she could never have earned as much back in Guatemala, even if she worked non-stop without days off. Nancy was pleased with her new life and even planned to bring her daughters to Spain once she had saved enough to rent a comfortable and spacious home for the whole family. Nancy initially kept her personal life private, citing her busy work schedule as the reason. However, in the spring of 2020, she confided in her parents about meeting Carlos Andres Bustamante, with whom she had begun a romantic relationship. The two had met by chance while Nancy was searching for a new place to live, and as they spent more time together, their relationship blossomed. They eventually moved in together, with Carlos being a year older than Nancy. At the start of their relationship, Carlos didn't have a steady income, relying on small, odd jobs to get by. As a result, Nancy became the primary breadwinner, covering their housing and bills, and often providing financial support for Carlos's personal expenses. Despite this, Nancy never expressed any concerns to her family, leading them to believe that she had found a loving and supportive partner. Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also relocated to Spain, and she remained in close contact with them, especially Dennis, the youngest, who had met Carlos and found him likable. In June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to Santander, a resort city on the Atlantic coast. When Nancy spoke with her family, she mentioned that the climate was warmer and there were more job opportunities. However, this was when problems in her relationship with Carlos started to emerge, which she tried to keep hidden. Carlos turned out to be jealous, hot-tempered, and even cruel. He had no career ambitions and was content to be supported by Nancy. Moreover, he struggled with alcohol abuse and occasionally used prohibited substances, despite repeatedly promising to quit and find a stable job. When Nancy discovered she was pregnant, She was already questioning whether to continue her life with Carlos. Carlos was overjoyed by the news and promised that their life would improve, but in reality, things only worsened. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from Nancy or asking his mother for it. Worse still, he began physically abusing Nancy, which she tried to conceal from everyone. On the evening of August 12th, a disturbing scene unfolded while Nancy was video chatting with her parents. Her partner, Carlos, suddenly burst into a fit of rage, yelling at Nancy and demanding to know who she was talking to. Refusing to believe her when she told him it was her mother, he snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by glancing at the screen, he carelessly tossed the device onto a chair and walked away. The very next day, a similar incident occurred. Carlos again wrestled the phone from Nancy's hands while she was speaking with her parents and daughters. He insisted on knowing who she was talking to, hurled insults at her, and even made threats. A terrified Nancy later attempted to downplay the situation to her relatives, attributing Carlos's behavior to excessive jealousy and assuring them that everything was under control. However, her concerned parents urged her to report the incidents to the police, but Nancy insisted on handling the matter herself. On August 17th, Nancy had a concerning phone conversation with her sister. She stated that if anything happened to her, Carlos would be responsible. Although her words were ominous, she didn't explain further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard from Nancy. Nancy vanished on August 20th around 2 p.m. She sent a text to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did. Her family tried contacting Carlos, but he didn't respond either. The situation was alarming because the couple had recently moved to Santander, had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country. A few days later, a suspicious message came from Carlos's phone, claiming that he and Nancy had argued and decided to separate. The message stated that Nancy had left to find a new apartment, ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she was. Nancy's brothers suggested that Carlos come to Ciudad Real to file a missing person report with them. Carlos agreed, but he never showed up, didn't file the report, and ceased communicating with the family. Nancy's relatives reached out to the police to file a report about her disappearance. In the meantime, Nancy's friends provided her brothers with the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, she became emotional and confessed that she had suspected her son might do something harmful to his partner, but she didn't provide any specific details. Sandra also claimed to have no knowledge about the whereabouts of her son and his fiancée. Although Carlos wasn't answering her calls, he sent her brief messages asking her to stop inquiring and to give him some time. Despite liking Nancy, Sandra was aware of her son's capabilities and understood his true nature. Sandra went to the police station the next day for questioning about Nancy's disappearance. She told the officers what she had already shared with Nancy's brothers: Carlos's troubling behavior and a lengthy text message from Nancy. In the message, Nancy warned Sandra not to give Carlos any money because he would waste it on alcohol and drugs, which made him aggressive and cruel. Nancy said Carlos had no intention of finding a job or overcoming his addictions, and his behavior had become increasingly threatening, making her consider leaving him. She believed it was better to end their relationship before someone got hurt. The investigation also uncovered some disturbing information about Carlos. He had been convicted of bodily harm multiple times, including brutally beating his own mother when he was 17. Although he only received probation at the time, he later served short sentences for assaulting women he lived with and had relationships with. The investigation into Carlos and Nancy's relationship revealed many red flags from the start. Carlos had a history of aggression, drug addiction, and a criminal record, which was compounded by his uncontrollable rage. Meanwhile, Nancy's friends disclosed that she was not just a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had claimed. Instead, she was providing escort services to wealthy clients in Santander, earning a substantial income. Carlos was aware of her occupation and initially accepted it, as it allowed him to avoid finding work himself. However, when Nancy became pregnant, Carlos's behavior became increasingly erratic. He grew suspicious about the child's paternity, wondering if it belonged to one of her clients. Additionally, he was consumed by jealousy, vacillating between preventing her from interacting with other men and forcing her to continue working to support them financially. Meanwhile, Carlos squandered the money he took from his mother on his own vices, leaving them struggling to make ends meet. After nearly a week of unexplained absence, Nancy and Carlos's whereabouts were unknown. Although Carlos had been in touch through messages, he never revealed his location. It wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a search warrant for the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. The discovery they made was gruesome and left no doubt that Nancy had met a tragic end. Bloodstains were found throughout the apartment, with some attempts made to clean them up, but most were still visible to the naked eye, including in the clogged bathroom and toilet drains. The police also found fragments of bones, hair, skin, and internal organs. Forensic analysis confirmed that these belonged to Nancy, even though her body was not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally killed, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos was quickly identified as the main suspect in the case due to evidence found in the apartment, including a package from a local hardware store with his fingerprints on it. The package was for a small hatchet, but the tool itself was not discovered. Further investigation revealed that Carlos had bought the hatchet, along with rubber gloves and large trash bags, at a nearby market on August 20th. This was confirmed by security footage from the store. An elderly vendor who sold Carlos a small cart also positively identified him from a photo. The day after the gruesome discovery in the apartment, Carlos surprisingly surrendered to a Madrid police station, attempting to shift suspicion away from himself. He claimed to be reporting Nancy missing, but was promptly arrested as the prime suspect in the heinous crime. Carlos professed his innocence, stating that he and Nancy had argued and parted ways on August 20th, after which he left town in an emotional state. Unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy, he suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to gather her belongings. However, Carlos's alibi seemed dubious, especially considering the police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. Despite conducting an extensive search of nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline with the help of divers, no trace of Nancy was found. To further investigate, the police tracked Carlos's movements from August 20th to 26th, using his mobile phone signals, revealing that he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and visiting Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to conceal his activities, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel across the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage captured Carlos's movements on the evening of August 20th. He was seen walking towards a large forest park, but returned to his apartment late at night. He then left again, this time pushing a cart filled with unusual, oddly shaped bags. Since there were few cameras within the park, Carlos vanished from view once he entered the wooded area. Later, he re-emerged with the same cart, but it was now significantly lighter. He then proceeded towards the railway tracks, which were located near a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. After visiting this area, Carlos returned once more, but this time without the extra weight, providing law enforcement with a clear lead on where to search for the body. On September 16th, police discovered bags containing badly decomposed human remains in a heavily overgrown area on a hillside. The remains were identified as those of Nancy Gorcey, who had been dismembered into 20 parts using a hatchet. Although security camera footage showed everything Carlos had transported in a cart was recovered, one crucial item was still missing: the fetus of the 4-month pregnant Nancy. The state of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen revealed a brutal mutilation with a knife and hatchet, suggesting that the killer had removed the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Despite mounting evidence, Carlos refused to admit his involvement, providing contradictory statements and trying to shift the blame onto an unknown attacker. However, traces of Nancy's blood were found on his clothes and shoes, which he had attempted to wash off but failed to completely remove. Through diligent investigation, authorities were able to reconstruct the sequence of tragic events and the entire scenario of the crime, ultimately incriminating Carlos. Forensic experts have reconstructed the events of August 20th. After an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner, Nancy, in the kitchen, where bloodstains were later found on the floor and walls. Next, he moved Nancy's body to the bathroom, went shopping at a hardware store in the market, and then used a hatchet and large kitchen knife to dismember her body into 20 pieces. He placed the pieces in bags and loaded them into a cart. That night, he took the cart to a park, searching for secluded areas to dispose of the body parts. He followed a pre-planned route, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. The fate of the fetus removed from Nancy's body remains unknown. Carlos denied his guilt, claiming to have loved Nancy from the time of the murder until his arrest in Madrid. He used the money he stole from Nancy to fund his daily bar hopping across various cities. The investigation and search for evidence and witnesses took nearly 2 years, and the trial did not begin until July 2022. In November 2022, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence too lenient. Carlos was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison and ordered to pay €150,000 in compensation to Nancy's parents and daughters. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Cutshall. Lindsay was born in 1982 in Ohio and grew up in a very religious family. She was an active and adventurous person, interested in sports, hiking, and extreme tourism. She attended Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia and dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers. Jason, on the other hand, was born in 1978 in Michigan and also grew up in a deeply religious family. He was interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild, and had leadership qualities. The couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in Appalachia and immediately felt a mutual connection. They got engaged 6 months later and planned to get married in September 2004, with big plans for their future together. Lindsay and Jason, senior counselors at a Christian summer camp in California, had plans to start their own relationship. In the summer of 2004, they decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues in advance, leaving 2 experienced counselors in charge, and promised to return by Monday. They set off in Lindsay's 1992 red Ford Tempo, but that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, they hadn't returned, but no alarm was raised, as everyone was confident they would arrive late that night or early Monday morning. However, when they still hadn't returned after the morning roll call at 8 a.m., their colleagues contacted the police and informed the missing couple's families. The police investigation faced a significant problem. No one knew precisely where they had gone. They had planned to explore around San Francisco, and their love for adventure and extreme leisure made it possible they could be in remote areas with no communication or civilization. While the police waited for the legally mandated 2 days, during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends organized a search effort. They distributed flyers with photos of the couple and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation, focusing on San Francisco, its suburbs, and surroundings. However, the area was vast, making it impossible to thoroughly search it. A friend's suggestion that the couple loved wild, rocky beaches prompted the police to focus on these areas. The search yielded no results for several days, and hope of finding the couple alive was rapidly diminishing. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky, wild beaches reported finding 2 bodies in sleeping bags. The police arrived at the scene to find the red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point and a steep trail leading directly to the beach. The car was identified as belonging to Lindsay Cutshaw. Descending the trail to the beach, officers found 2 individuals in bright sleeping bags. Initially, it seemed like they were just sleeping, but they didn't respond to calls or noise. Upon closer inspection, officers discovered that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief examination suggested that they had died from gunshot wounds to the head, and the distinctive smell of decomposition indicated they had been there for more than a day. All of the victims' belongings, including mobile phones, wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them, ruling out robbery as a motive. The keys to their parked car above were also visibly placed, eliminating car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young couple who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. This was later confirmed by documents found nearby, identifying them as Lindsay Cutshaw and Jason Allen. The investigation revealed that the couple's bodies had no signs of physical or intimate assault, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident and didn't have a chance to react or defend themselves. The lack of signs of struggle or escape attempts suggested a swift and brutal act, resembling an execution or vendetta. The questions surrounding the case multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs of anyone else having stayed in the area, and the secluded beach was only accessible via a steep trail. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the victims' heads, indicated by specific traces. An empty beer bottle from a rare brand, not commonly found in the area, was discovered a few meters from the sleeping bags. Since the victims didn't drink alcohol, it was possible that the bottle belonged to the shooter. This was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. One theory proposed that the couple might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was possible that they might have inadvertently displeased someone. The investigation considered the possibility that the shooter was intoxicated or mentally unstable. A crucial clue was found in the rare Marlin brand rifle, .45 caliber Model 18, produced in 1994, which was identified from the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls. Based on this, investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone, possibly a hunter or firearm enthusiast. To piece together their final hours, investigators analyzed the photos they took and the guest book entries they wrote in the tourist cabin near the lookout point. They had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles away, which was confirmed by witness accounts and photographs. They had searched for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in nearby hotels due to the peak tourist season. They then dined at a local restaurant, took a walk, and set off again in the evening. Witnesses reported that they were friendly and showed no signs of conflict. However, they had decided to camp on the prohibited beach, using their sleeping bags instead of a tent, believing they faced no threats on a warm August night. The investigation narrowed down the time frame of the crime to between 11 p.m. on Saturday and dawn on Sunday, when the couple likely went to sleep but did not survive until morning. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who was seen nearby on the evening before the crime, but he was quickly cleared due to lack of evidence and DNA mismatch. The investigation into the double homicide stalled for nearly 2 years until the spring of 2006, when the police decided to release details of the weapon used in the crime and offered a $50,000 reward for any useful information. This led to around 1,000 calls, although most did not advance the investigation. However, the police became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gallen, who was pointed out by several locals. According to them, Gallen collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, and was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Gallen was arrested and questioned, but he had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, so Gallen had to be released. Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter, 61-year-old Joseph Henry Burgess, came under scrutiny. He was often seen with a firearm, frightening local residents. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Burgess lived in Canada, where he joined the Commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person. However, he soon had a conflict with 2 young people that escalated into outright enmity, and a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished, and his guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues. However, he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally, and managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century. Fast forward to 2017 in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gallen family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gallen, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. The police recognized the shooter's name, as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in a double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been on the police's radar twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement reopened the case and took a closer look at a man who was a potential suspect 13 years earlier. On his social media, he had posted pictures of his large collection of weapons and claimed to have telepathic and extrasensory abilities. He believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space, which suggested that he had a disturbed mind. The police suspected that he had serious mental health issues. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and maintained his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's social media page, they found something interesting. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had sent a message to his brother, suggesting that she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew the truth, but kept silent. Unfortunately, it was no longer possible to question either of them, since the brother had been shot and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. When shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, Sean surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account of the crime. Despite it being over 13 years since the double homicide, Sean remembered the details of that night vividly. He claimed that he had left his house with a Marlin rifle, intending to hunt in a wooded area. He wandered aimlessly for a couple of hours before descending to a wild beach, which he claimed was a spot to encounter bears. As he walked along the shore, he spotted two bright sleeping bags and discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes before suddenly hearing voices in his head commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space he could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. Sean Gallen committed a brutal double homicide on a beach. After shooting the couple, he collected the shell casings and took them away in an empty beer can. He then gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. The father buried the rifle in the cellar of his old barn without asking any questions. Years later, when Sean was arrested, he blamed the voices in his head for ordering him to commit violent acts. His defense team claimed he was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. However, a forensic psychiatric evaluation revealed that although Sean suffered from mental disorders exacerbated by substance abuse, he had deliberately planned and executed the crime. The evaluation showed that Sean was fully aware of his actions and had taken steps to cover his tracks and avoid police detection. This included killing the young man first, knowing the woman would be unable to resist, and taking the casings with him to hide evidence. What was surprising was that Sean's family members and former girlfriend had suspected or known about his involvement in the crime, but none of them had reported him to the police. Sean was eventually tried and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus an additional 94 years for killing his own brother in 2017. He is currently serving his sentence in a special prison unit for dangerous inmates with mental disorders, where he is kept under close surveillance due to his aggressive behavior and claims of hearing voices. The motive behind the double homicide was never established, with Sean simply deciding to end the couple's lives because he saw them sleeping on the beach. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind-hearted and empathetic person who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was failing to recognize her partner's true nature in time. As time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lindsay's story began when she discovered she was pregnant at 17. Raised in a loving family, she wasn't emotionally unprepared, but her boyfriend's abandonment scared her. Lindsay was aware that motherhood would bring physical and financial challenges. She was relieved to meet Mitchell, who seemed like a gentleman, attentive and caring, and didn't shy away from her despite her pregnancy. However, his true nature would eventually be exposed, leading to devastating consequences. Mitchell fell in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, raising her child as his own. He worked hard to provide for her, even taking extra hours to ensure she wanted for nothing. However, their 5-week-old relationship shocked their parents, who felt they were rushing into marriage. Despite their doubts, they got married in August 1995, surrounded by Lindsay's family and only a few of Mitchell's relatives. Lindsay's family noticed that Mitchell was overly sweet and polite, but they kept their misgivings to themselves. The newlyweds had a dispute on their wedding night, which left a bad impression on Lindsay's relatives. Mitchell's behavior became increasingly controlling and violent. Lindsay sought psychological support and reported the abuse, but her husband would answer the door and phone calls, preventing her from contacting her social worker. The social worker, concerned for Lindsay's safety, reported her missing in February 1999. The police visited the address but were unable to speak with Lindsay, and Mitchell claimed she had left him for another man. The search for Lindsay began, and her relatives reported that they last saw her on December 11th, appearing happy and healthy. Her mother had tried to reach her on December 24th, but was told by Mitchell that she had left with friends accused of infidelity. Detectives were puzzled by the fact that no one had expressed concern about Lindsay's well-being for 2 months. It was clear that Mitchell had isolated her from the outside world, including her close relatives. Although they had previously struggled to communicate with her, it was possible for Lindsay to go unnoticed for a while. However, this didn't mean her family wasn't worried. The news of her disappearance was alarming to everyone. They all described Lindsay as a modest person who didn't drink, and Mitchell had restricted her contact with friends and acquaintances. There were many inconsistencies in Mitchell's story, which contradicted his character profile and raised the investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. The situation merited a thorough investigation, so the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances, trying to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where they lived. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted by the time Lindsay's disappearance was reported. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person on December 15th at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea together, and during their brief conversation, Lindsay slipped a note into her sister's hand, asking her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and forgot about it in the whirlwind of days. Regrettably, she couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again for several months. Investigators tried to hold on to any information they could, suspecting that she was no longer alive due to her prolonged absence. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence, but the more they learned about their life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. They had married shortly after their wedding and moved away from their parents, renting an apartment in Southport. Later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the new baby's joy was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment, he could be joking and laughing. The next, he became unbalanced and aggressive. She tried to maintain a fragile peace at home, but didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. Loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations, with Mitchell kneeling, begging for forgiveness, and professing his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had returned to the family, but then the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening, and they advised her to return home and end her suffering. It was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control, forbidding his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricting her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her suspicions of her husband Mitchell's infidelity. She shared an incident where a woman came to their home looking for him and was shocked to learn he was married. This led to an argument that escalated into physical violence. From then on, physical abuse became a regular part of their life as Mitchell sought to control Lindsay and maintain his reputation. Mitchell began to isolate Lindsay from her neighbors, friends, and family, despite her efforts to secretly maintain contact with them. Lindsay stayed in the marriage because Mitchell provided a comfortable life, financially supporting her and their child. However, when she discovered she was pregnant again, she knew she didn't want more children and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When Mitchell found out, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. Lindsay packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family was relieved, and she proceeded with the pregnancy termination as planned. Over time, she began to miss Mitchell, who frequently called and begged her to come back. Mitchell eventually convinced Lindsay to give him another chance, and initially, everything seemed to go well. However, his severe anger outbursts continued, and he destroyed their apartment, leading to them being evicted. They had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. Their relationship continued to deteriorate, with Mitchell frequently leaving home for days or weeks at a time. Lindsay grew accustomed to his behavior, but eventually filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. She realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own and reached out to a local charity that assisted women in difficult situations. With their help, Lindsay found subsidized housing in another city and took measures to distance herself from Mitchell, including obtaining a restraining order. She began to rebuild her life, started a journal, and sought therapy. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and began calling her, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, who had been feeling lonely, reunited with Mitchell despite her relatives' and friends' disapproval. They began living together again, which shocked those who cared about her. However, Mitchell remained unpopular with them, and they eventually stopped communicating with Lindsay, believing she had returned to an abusive relationship. This decision ultimately proved fatal. Initially, Mitchell was cooperative during the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance. However, as the case gained media attention, he shifted his focus and became a public figure, inviting journalists into his home. His numerous media appearances seemed insincere, with some viewers noticing a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents and detectives viewed Mitchell as the prime suspect, but the lack of direct evidence hindered their efforts. Searches were conducted at their home and throughout the area, but Mitchell continued to appear in the media, even declaring that Lindsay's family would one day apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mitchell sent a postcard to the lead investigator with a pack of hair dye, mocking the detective and displaying his arrogance. The investigation team responded by hinting that Mitchell was not who he claimed to be, tarnishing his reputation. In February 2000, it was discovered that Mitchell had been forging Lindsay's signature to receive social benefits, which indirectly implicated him in her disappearance. Despite the financial motive, Mitchell's popularity worked in his favor, and many supporters argued that he, as a single father, deserved financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring charges, but they eventually accused Mitchell of fraud. He was found guilty and sentenced to community service. However, Mitchell's popularity began to wane as the forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared suspicious. The number of angry comments increased, and Mitchell eventually snapped, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. The case might have remained unsolved had it not been for a chance discovery on June 1, 2000, when a parkgoer noticed their dog acting strangely near a roller coaster. Human remains were uncovered, and forensic examination confirmed they belonged to Lindsay Key. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay was a victim of a brutal crime. The focus shifted to finding the perpetrator, and on June 7, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. After 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down and confessed to dismembering and murdering Lindsay on December 15, 1998. Mitchell told authorities that Lindsay had informed him of her decision to file for divorce earlier that day, which enraged him and led him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, using a gap under the door to conceal any odors. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, he enlisted the assistance of his brother Elliot, a butcher, who was initially hesitant but eventually persuaded. While the children played in the next room, Mitchell and Elliot dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, Mitchell showed no remorse or empathy, instead seeming proud of his actions and stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led authorities to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs, although her head and one hand were never recovered. Forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001, with Mitchell being found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist noted that Mitchell showed signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole, but his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilson family, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released and have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life and added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. He also commented on the prevalence of domestic Stockholm syndrome, where victims often adapt to their abusers throughout their lives, even when their families come to their aid. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lamu. Lamu was born in 1990 in Nyawa, Tibet, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. The family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lama had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains to find rare herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lama was well versed in these plants and had a deep love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok, where she posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she wasn't chasing fame. Instead, fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and childlike spontaneity. Lamu never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. She never used makeup or filters, and her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals, but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offering warm words, expressing gratitude for her work, and asking for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. Lamu's personal life was marred by her abusive husband, Tong Li. For many years, she suffered at his hands, enduring beatings and humiliations, but tried not to show her deep unhappiness. Tong Li was born in 1990 in Sichuan Province, China, into a simple and modest family. His parents adored him and spoiled him from an early age. At 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, earning little but keeping all the money to himself. This marked the beginning of his greedy, arrogant, and selfish nature. As a teenager, Tong began dealing in banned substances, stealing, and gambling, and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape poverty. At 15, he left home and joined a gang, engaging in illegal activities. Meanwhile, Tong's parents opened a successful spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. When the business took off, Tong returned home, offering to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives' hard work. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries and boasting to friends about his expensive items. He even claimed the store's success as his own, while his family worked hard daily. He maintained a separate under-the-table business with local criminals. Lamu and Tong met when they were 17. Tong was enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity, and courted her earnestly, giving gifts and promising to change for her. Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming. They developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. Tong proposed to Lamu when he turned 19, and she eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry, believing they were too young to start a family. Lamu moved into her mother-in-law's house, but soon, Tong started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife changed drastically. Tong became crude, self-centered, and aggressive, taking a portion of the store's earnings and spending all the money on his own needs. Lamu and her husband Tong's relationship started to deteriorate. They frequently argued, with Lamu urging him to change his ways, give up drinking, and stop associating with criminals. However, Tong refused to listen, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. Their home became a battleground with conflicts erupting daily. Even when Lamu became pregnant, the situation didn't improve. One day, Tong's behavior shocked Lamu. She declared she would return to her parents' home, refusing to tolerate his treatment. Her mother-in-law, who had witnessed the incident, intervened, scolding her son and telling him he had no right to treat Lamu that way. The mother-in-law convinced Lamu to stay, promising that the abuse would stop. Lamu believed her and gave her husband another chance, a decision she would later regret. The abuse continued, with Tong regularly becoming physically violent, only to apologize afterward, begging Lamu not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had changed, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave, Tong threatened to take their son away and harm her and her parents. Fearing for her safety, Lamu stayed. Their child became Tong's tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu kept her nightmare hidden from her relatives, including her close older sister. After her mother's passing in 2012, Lamu found herself managing her parents' household and caring for her elderly father and grandmother. She continued to climb mountains to gather herbs, using the time to escape her husband's wrath and find solace in her thoughts. In 2017, Lamu gave birth to a second son, but her relations with Tong remained strained. Her mother-in-law stopped intervening on her behalf. Around the same time, Lamu created a social media account, posting videos about local beauty, flowers, and herbs. She gained a large following who admired her work and knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. Her online presence became an outlet for her to express herself and momentarily escape her difficult reality. Lamu kept her domestic violence a secret, never complaining to her audience about her situation. However, when her grandmother passed away in 2019, she posted a video expressing her grief. Her followers supported her, unlike her husband, who became furious and struck her. Lamu finally decided to leave her abusive husband in January 2020 after enduring another violent incident. She took her sons and moved back to her parents' home, filing for divorce. At first, she felt calm and confident, despite trying to hide a large bruise under her eye. However, the court's decision to divide custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with her and the older with her ex-husband, was a devastating blow. During the divorce proceedings, her ex-husband suddenly changed his tactics, romantically pursuing her again and proposing they start over and not break up the family. For a couple of months, he pretended to be a repentant man, giving her flowers, creating celebrations, helping around the house, and even joining her on trips. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, they were married, but the fairy tale ended soon after Lamu returned to her husband's house. He reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, brutally attacking her nearly to death within 2 weeks of remarrying. He snatched her phone, hurled it against the wall, and battered her mercilessly. Lamu fled the house, barefoot, and went to the police, seeking protection. However, they only took her statement and advised her to resolve the family conflict on her own. Lamu decided to hide in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Her enraged husband was ready to end her life, but didn't know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house, so he visited and began yelling, demanding to know where Lamu was. When her sister claimed ignorance, he struck her repeatedly, fracturing her cheekbone, eye socket, and nose. After the Lamu's sister filed a police report, Lamu's ex-husband was finally held accountable, but not arrested. During the second divorce proceedings, the court left both sons with the father, as the wealthy Lee family's influence proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, recorded a video of herself singing and dancing, trying to relieve stress. However, her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14, 2020, Lamu started a live stream, chatting with her followers while dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. Suddenly, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. Lamu turned pale, frozen in fear, staring at the person entering. She jumped up, trying to escape, but the tripod with her smartphone fell, camera down. Viewers could only hear the heavy footsteps, the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls, and Lamu screaming for help. Her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell, followed by the click of a lighter and a piercing scream. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room grew louder. Followers were left stunned, refusing to accept that they had just witnessed a tragedy. It was not a prank, unfortunately. The worst had occurred. Tong had brutally exacted revenge on his ex-wife, Lamu, for leaving him. He rode a motorcycle to her house, bringing a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw Lamu in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door open. Lamu was caught off guard, barely understanding what was happening before she tried to flee. Tong prevented her escape, dousing her with fuel and wounding her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand the gravity of the situation as the flames erupted. Lamu's relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams were burning like torches, blocking the entrance. Miraculously, firefighters took about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and literally melted to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing, with a faint pulse detectable. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke. Despite her critical condition, Lamu desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. The city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers, writing a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the necessary care, and her condition was stabilized. At one point, it seemed she might recover. Tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, Lamu's heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. Tong was arrested the day after committing this heinous act. At the trial, his mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Tong guilty of deliberate cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death. Additionally, the court mandated his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out and Tong Li was executed. 2 years after the tragic event that ended Lamu's life, her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in on the ground floor. Her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents, the Li family, who remained one of the wealthiest in the village and were believed to provide the children with better living conditions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. Nathan and Crystal Maddox grew up on neighboring streets, fell in love, and later got married when Crystal became pregnant. Despite initial disapproval from Crystal's parents, they eventually accepted the relationship and even let the young couple get married. After their wedding, Nathan and Crystal started a family, having a daughter named Madison. However, their life was far from perfect. Nathan had to work hard to support his family, often traveling to Montana for work. Despite the distance, he remained devoted to his family, regularly sending money and visiting whenever possible. But one day, Nathan returned home from Montana to find his house empty and a note from Crystal saying she was leaving him. She claimed she didn't know where he was or when he would return, which was a lie, as Nathan had been regularly updating her on his whereabouts. The worst part was that she took their daughter Madison with her and even went to the police station, falsely accusing Nathan of neglecting his child in order to gain full custody. Nathan tried to visit his daughter Madison, but her mother's family, the Westfalls, kept pushing him away, relieved to be rid of him. Years passed, and Nathan returned to his hometown to be close to Madison. He didn't give up trying to see her, but he knew he needed a lawyer to get official custody and legal visitation rights. During this time, Nathan met Crystal, an old friend from childhood. They had gone to school together, but their paths diverged when Crystal moved to the city to attend university. However, she got married and started a family instead of pursuing a career. After her divorce, Crystal returned to her hometown with her 4 children. Nathan was immediately drawn to Crystal's energy and optimism. They got married in 2013, and Nathan worked at a warehouse while Crystal started a clothing business and opened a children's boutique. The family was doing well, and they could finally afford a good lawyer to help Nathan get custody of Madison. Madison was thrilled with her father's new family, including Crystal and her siblings. This made Kristen's parents, Lita and Paula Westfall, very resentful and afraid of losing their granddaughter. In 2012, Kristen had applied for full custody of Madison, and the battle dragged on for 2 years. However, Crystal's presence in Nathan's life changed everything. With a stable family and a good job, Nathan was granted visitation rights, and he was ecstatic. In October 2013, the judge allowed supervised visits with Madison. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal attended a Sunday service at Mount Carmel Church, planning to take Madison for a walk afterwards. But as they left the church, 3 loud shots were heard. Nathan and Crystal were shot and killed, shocking the small town. The police investigation revealed that Nathan and Crystal were shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle, and Nathan was also shot in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, indicating that there were two shooters. The investigation continued, with interviews of witnesses, acquaintances, and relatives, including Kristen's family. The Westfall's behavior shocked investigators. Instead of grieving Nathan's death, they seemed to be hiding their joy. Paul Westfall even faked a seizure, claiming he was too shocked to believe the news. It was clear they were involved in the murder, but the motive remained unknown. Kristen was the first to be interviewed, and her demeanor was eerily calm, and that despite her long history with Nathan and their shared child. She provided strange details about him, only highlighting the negative aspects of their relationship. Kristen claimed she knew who killed him, mentioning that Nathan had been involved with dangerous motorcycle gangs in Montana. One gang member had even threatened to kill him at his mother's house. Although this story checked out, it turned out to be an empty threat due to a broken motorcycle. As an alibi, Kristen said she was at the grocery store with her father, Paul, on the day of the crime. Surveillance footage confirmed their presence at 10:57 a.m. Paul told the same story, but as a hunter with access to firearms, his hands were tested for gunpowder residue, which came back negative. However, his reaction to Nathan's death seemed suspicious, leaving a sliver of doubt about his sincerity. Further investigation revealed that Nathan was involved in a bitter custody battle with Kristen over their daughter. He was close to gaining custody, which the Westfall family strongly opposed. This desperate battle might have been a motive for the murder, but the police had no concrete evidence to arrest anyone. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 of them were the shooters. Investigators were yet to figure out who pulled the trigger or if they had hired a killer. Focusing on the key player in the controversy, Madison Maddox, the police decided to act. They removed her from the home, citing safety concerns, and searched the house. The search yielded disturbing results. A gun was easily accessible, and illegal drugs were scattered around the house. In 2013, Kristen was arrested and charged with possessing a controlled substance. Despite this, she continued to live with her parents and daughter, defying court orders. In 2014, Child Protective Services discovered a used syringe with illegal substances and a gun on Kristen's nightstand, leading to Madison being taken into temporary custody. The authorities wanted to place Madison in foster care due to the presence of illegal substances and a gun in the Westfall home. However, there was no direct evidence linking the Westfalls to the Maddox murder, and cross-examinations did not produce the desired results. To pressure the Westfalls, the police focused on 18-year-old Cameron, the most vulnerable family member. They threatened him with life imprisonment for his family and the death penalty for the direct killers if he didn't cooperate. Fearing for his family, Cameron agreed to work with the investigation and revealed the details of the crime. The murder of the young couple, Maddox, was carefully planned by the Westfall family to eliminate Nathan from his role as father. This was due to a bitter custody dispute between Nathan and his ex-wife, Kristen, who had the support of her family. The Westfalls were determined to keep Madison from her father, and when the judge allowed Nathan multiple visitations, it became clear he could win the trial. Kristen and her family plotted a scheme to remove Nathan from Madison's life. They tried to find someone to kill him, but when that failed, Kristen and her father decided to do it themselves. On January 18th, the family attended church, and Kristen and Paul created an alibi by posing as customers at a distant store to get on CCTV cameras. Meanwhile, Lita Westfall, Kristen's mother, attended the church service with Madison and informed Paul of Nathan and Crystal's departure. She called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron played a role in concealing the evidence, discarding the gun used in the murder near a remote church and at a lake. He later cooperated with authorities, revealing that Kristen came up with the idea and the family went along with it. The police arrested Kristen, her brother Cameron, and her parents, Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Kristen and Paul were the ones who pulled the trigger, while Cameron and Lita acted as willing accomplices. Although Lita was at the church during the incident, phone records showed she informed her daughter and husband of the couple's whereabouts. The trial was lengthy, with each member of the Westphal family tried separately. Paul Westphal was initially found mentally unfit, but was later deemed competent and faced the death penalty along with Lita. To avoid the death penalty, they agreed to a plea bargain with the DA's office. Paul Westphal took a plea bargain with the prosecution, pleading guilty to the charges and receiving a life sentence without parole. Lita Westphal, his wife, also took a plea bargain, pleading guilty to organized criminal activity. She will be eligible for parole in 2046 and is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Kristen Westphal, the daughter of Paul and Lita, pleaded not guilty to all charges against her, claiming her family was crazy and she was the only sane one. However, when her family members testified against her in court, she was unable to respond. The motive behind the murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox was revealed to be custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Madison. Kristen did not want Nathan to have unrestricted access to Madison and wanted to control her father's communication with the child. The trial took over a week, and with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury found her guilty of capital murder in just 8 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Cameron Westphal, the youngest member of the family, was charged with 2 counts of tampering with evidence. He pleaded guilty and received a deferred sentence, contingent upon him testifying against his family. He faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Although he claimed to have had no involvement in the actual shooting, phone records showed that his mother had texted her husband and daughter during the crime. Cameron is currently incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Texas and is expected to be released in 2025. The case was highly publicized and shook the community of Colmsnale, Texas, to its core. The Westphal family's brutal crime was committed outside Mount Carmel Baptist Church, where Nathan and Crystal Maddox were shot and killed in 2014. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence the following year. Lloyd Paul was also sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to first-degree murder, which meant he could not appeal his sentence. Kristen Westphal, the mastermind behind the crime, received a life sentence without parole. The legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox, Kristen's daughter, continued even after the Westphal family was sentenced. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. It's worth noting that many people die in custody battles every year, and instead of making children happier, these battles often leave them with psychological problems. The Westphal family, who were devout churchgoers, were willing to kill to achieve their goals, hiding behind their concern for Madison. Nathan, Madison's father, was not a bad person and loved his daughter. However, his ex-wife Kristen was filled with hatred towards him, particularly because he had started a new family and found happiness with his new partner, Crystal. Kristen was able to manipulate her family against Nathan, leading to the tragic events that unfolded. The custody dispute started before Nathan and Crystal's relationship, and in the end, there is only one loser, Madison. Hopefully, when she grows up, she will not remember the selfishness of the adults who used her for their own gain, claiming to act out of love. If they truly loved her, they would have worked to build a normal relationship for her sake, rather than pursuing their own interests.